It started as an ordinary evening, until it wasn't. I never imagined that one day I'd find myself trapped in a room with two brothers, the air thick with tension, the walls closing in around me. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. But life has a way of leading you into places you never intended to go. And now there was no turning back. Looking back, it all started so innocently. A few casual messages, shared laughter over inside jokes, stolen moments that felt too good to be wrong. I met him first. Let's call him Jake. He was charming in a way that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. The kind of charm that makes you forget about red flags, even when they're waving right in front of you. We connected instantly, our chemistry undeniable. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Jake had a brother. And that was where everything started to unravel. The first time I met his brother, Daniel, something shifted in the air. He wasn't like Jake. Where Jake was outgoing and smooth, Daniel was quiet, observant. There was something intense about him, something I couldn't quite place. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing, just a normal reaction to meeting someone new. But as time passed, it became harder to ignore. The glances that lasted a second too long, the way he seemed to know things I hadn't said out loud. And then the realization, the cold, sinking realization, that this wasn't just a coincidence. I should have left right then, walked away before it got complicated. But emotions don't work like that, do they? Once you're in too deep, logic becomes background noise. So I stayed. I told myself I could handle it, that no one had to get hurt. But the truth was, I was playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before everything burned. That night, the one that changed everything, I found myself in a place I never should have been. Alone, in a room, with two brothers. The air was thick with unspoken words, the weight of secrets pressing down on all of us. I could feel their eyes on me, searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. Jake's voice was the first to break the silence. "So," he said, his tone unreadable, "are you going to tell me, or should he?" My stomach twisted. My mind raced. I looked from one to the other. My breath caught somewhere between panic and regret. I had thought I had time. I had thought I could figure out a way to make this right. But I was wrong. Because in that moment, I realized the truth. There was no way out of this without breaking someone's heart. Maybe even my own. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as I searched for something, anything to say. But how do you explain something like this? How do you look someone in the eye and admit that the line between right and wrong blurred so easily, so effortlessly, that you didn't even realize you had crossed it until it was too late? Jake leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Daniel, on the other hand, looked different. His usual calm demeanor was cracking, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. I knew then that he hadn't told Jake everything. Not yet, but he was waiting, waiting to see if I would. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the consequences of every choice I had made. My mind flashed back to the first time Daniel and I were alone together. It hadn't been planned, it never was. But some things don't need planning. Some things just happen. It was late. Jake had left the room, and for the first time, I really saw Daniel. Not as Jake's brother. Not as someone I was supposed to keep a polite distance from, but as someone who saw me, really saw me. And that was the moment I knew, whatever this was, whatever had been growing between us, it wasn't just in my head. I told myself it didn't matter, that as long as nothing happened, as long as we never said the words out loud, it wasn't real, but it was a lie. A lie I let myself believe for too long. Because the truth was, the way Daniel looked at me said everything. The way I felt when he was near said everything. And now, standing in this room with both of them, I knew there was no more pretending. Jake's voice cut through my thoughts. "I'll ask you one more time," he said, his tone sharper now. "Are you going to tell me, or should he?" I glanced at Daniel, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. My stomach twisted. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. And no matter what I said, no matter how I tried to explain, I knew one thing for certain. Someone was about to walk away, hurt. Maybe all of us. But before I could open my mouth to speak, Daniel took a slow breath and turned to Jake. And then, in a voice that was too calm, too steady, he said, "You already know, don't you?" Jake didn't answer right away. He just stared at Daniel, his jaw tightening, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. I felt like an outsider in a moment that wasn't mine to control anymore. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Daniel was right. Jake did know. Maybe not all of it, maybe not the details, but enough. Enough for the pieces to start clicking into place. The late night glances, the hesitation in my voice when I spoke about Daniel. The way Daniel always seemed too careful around me, like he was holding back something dangerous. I could see it in Jake's face, the realization sinking in, the betrayal cutting deeper with every second that passed, and I hated myself for being the reason. Then Jake exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "So that's how it is?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "How long?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Daniel was faster. "It was never like that," he said quickly. "Not the way you think." Jake let out a bitter laugh. "Not the way I think? Then how was it, Daniel?" His voice rose, his anger spilling out now, raw and unfiltered. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear." Daniel didn't back down. "You want the truth?" he said, his voice steady. "Fine. The truth is, it wasn't supposed to happen. But it did." My breath caught. He had said it, out loud. No more pretending. No more secrets. And now there was no taking it back. Jake's eyes darkened, his hands clenching into fists. I knew in that moment that this wasn't over, not even close. Jake took a step forward, his eyes locked onto Daniel, his whole body tense like he was holding something back. The air in the room felt charged, ready to explode at any second. I wanted to say something, to stop this before it went too far, but my voice wouldn't come. Daniel didn't move. He didn't flinch, didn't step back. He just stood there, his jaw tight, his breathing slow and controlled. But I could see it in his eyes. He was bracing for whatever was coming next. "So that's it?" Jake's voice was cold now, like a slow burn instead of an eruption. "You didn't care? You just, what? Thought I wouldn't figure it out?" "It's not like that," Daniel said, but his voice lacked its usual steadiness. Jake let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Then tell me what it is like, Daniel. Tell me how my own brother—" He stopped, shaking his head, his hands clenched into fists. "I trusted you." The weight of those words hit harder than anything else. Trust. That's what was broken here, more than anything. And the worst part? There was no way to fix it. I finally found my voice. "Jake, please." But he didn't even look at me. His eyes stayed on Daniel, like I wasn't even in the room anymore. Then, in a quiet, dangerous voice, he asked, "Did you love her?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel's face hardened, but he didn't answer. And that was enough. Jake exhaled sharply, nodding, like something had just clicked into place. And in that moment, I knew this was about to get much worse. Jake's nod was slow, controlled, but I could see the storm raging beneath it. I had never seen him like this before. This quiet, this still. It scared me more than if he had been yelling. The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable, until finally he spoke. You know what hurts the most? His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that made my chest tighten. It's not even that it happened. It's that you didn't have the guts to tell me. Daniel's jaw clenched. I wanted to, he said, his voice low, but I didn't know how. Jake let out a bitter laugh. That's the thing, though. You did know how. You just didn't want to deal with what would come after. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, to break the tension, to make this stop before it spiraled further. But before I could, Jake turned to me for the first time. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time since this started, I saw something beneath the anger. Hurt, raw, undeniable pain. Did you love him? His voice was quieter now, but the weight of the question crushed me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could feel Daniel's eyes on me, waiting, just like Jake. I should have said no. I should have lied. But the truth was, I didn't know the answer. Not in a way that would make this better. Jake took my silence as all the confirmation he needed. He nodded again, like he had already known what I was going to say before I even said it. But then something changed. His expression shifted, his posture stiffened, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. You think this is bad? He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You have no idea. A chill ran down my spine. Something in his tone was off. Not just anger, not just betrayal, something else. Daniel stepped forward. Jake, what are you talking about? Jake let out a slow breath, like he was savoring what he was about to say. Then, with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, he looked at me and said, You should ask Daniel about his secret, the one he didn't tell you. My stomach dropped. I turned to Daniel, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. His face had gone pale, his body suddenly tense. Jake's smirk widened. Oh, so you thought you were the only one keeping secrets? He shook his head, stepping back toward the door. This just got interesting. And just like that, the ground beneath me felt like it was crumbling. I stood there, frozen, as Jake's footsteps faded down the hall. The weight of his words still hung in the air, pressing down on me like a force I couldn't escape. My best friend. The person I had trusted more than anyone. The betrayal was so deep, so unexpected, that it didn't even feel real. Daniel took a step toward me. Please, he said, his voice softer now. Let me explain. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel anything. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. I had spent so much time caught between these two brothers, tangled in emotions I couldn't control, but now I just wanted out. You should have told me, I whispered. Before any of this, you should have told me the truth. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression filled with regret. I know, and I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But he had. They both had. And maybe I had hurt them too. That was the worst part of all of this. No one had walked away clean. We had all made mistakes, told lies, let emotions pull us into something we weren't ready for. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stand a little taller. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice steady. Not with you, not with Jake, not with any of it. His face fell, but he didn't try to stop me. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, out of everything that had led me here. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped outside, filling my lungs with the kind of breath that comes when you finally let go. The truth was, love wasn't supposed to be this complicated. It wasn't supposed to leave you feeling shattered and lost. Maybe one day I'd understand why it had all happened the way it did. Maybe one day I'd find something real, something honest. But tonight, I was done. I walked away without looking back, leaving the past behind me where it belonged.